Welcome to LatinoAmericans with your host and narrator, Jacqueline Torres.
Everything you need to know about Latino history by the author Himilce Novas. She is an expert in Latino history, culture, literature, and human rights. We will start today with Commonwealth versus statehood. What's the big deal? The question of Commonwealth status versus statehood is a very big deal. First of all, as a Commonwealth, Puerto Rico is under the control of Congress, which has the discretion to curtail the high degree of local autonomy the island currently enjoys and to replace Puerto Rico's elected governor and legislature with another kind of government. If Puerto Rico was granted statehood, Congress would no longer retain ultimate authority and the island would possess permanent status. Secondly, with Commonwealth status, Puerto Rico elects only a non-voting resident commissioner to the U.S. House of Representatives. The island has no voting representation in Congress, a privilege afforded only to states. If Puerto Rico ever does become a state, it would send 2 senators to the Senate and 7 or 8 members to the House of Representatives, and it would have 9 electoral votes, which could certainly impact the Democrat-Republican balance of power on Capitol Hill. Thirdly, the citizens of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico are allowed to vote in presidential primaries, but they do not have the constitutional right to vote for president. Puerto Ricans who move to the U.S. mainland gain this right. Mainlanders who move to the island relinquish it. If Puerto Rico was a state, islanders would gain the presidential vote and ultimately would emerge as a powerful Latino political voice in the nation. And Puerto Rico would be the only state in which the overwhelming majority of residents speak only Spanish. That is why some Americans oppose statehood for Puerto Rico. With a Spanish-speaking state, America would become an officially bilingual nation in the way of Canada and would move one step closer to hermandad, brotherhood, and sisterhood with all the Spanish-speaking countries in the hemisphere. However, as a state, Puerto Rico would lose many of the advantages of Commonwealth status. For one, Puerto Ricans' sense of national identity, some argue, would be eroded by the nation's English-speaking majority if Puerto Rico was the 51st state. And with statehood, the island would have to forfeit its Olympic team, a potent symbol of Puerto Rican national pride. If they were residents of a state, Puerto Ricans would have to pay federal income tax, from which they are currently exempt. And without Commonwealth status, Puerto Rico could lose the tax incentives that have encouraged U.S. companies to invest heavily in the island since the 1950s, perhaps causing the island's economy to go from bad to worse. What happened on Vieques Island in 1999 that really got Puerto Ricans goat? The Puerto Rican island of Vieques, which is really only an islet, lies just 6 miles off the southeast coast of mainland Puerto Rico and is home to fewer than 10,000 residents. Between 1941 and 1950, the U.S. Department of the Navy purchased a total of 22,000 acres on the western and eastern ends of the island, and in the 1940s, U.S. naval and other military forces began to use the eastern tip for training operations involving bombing by naval aircraft, ship-to-shore gunnery practice, and marine amphibious landings. When the U.S. Navy halted its military activities on Culebra, another of 3 islets belonging to Puerto Rico, in 1975 in response to local opposition, dissatisfaction over military training operations on Vieques grew. Puerto Ricans and critics of the Navy's activities voiced concern over safety issues, over toxic materials from the Navy's operations, which they claimed were detrimental to the health of Viequenses and damaged the environmental and archaeological historic sites, over noise, especially from ship-to-shore gunfire, and over the economic toll of an absence of tourism and fishing on Vieques. The Navy countered that its activities posed no danger and that Vieques was essential to national security as the only site where air, land, and sea exercises could be conducted simultaneously. Anger over the Navy's use of Vieques boiled over in April 1999 when a Puerto Rican civilian employed as a security guard on the island was killed by a pair of off-target 500-pound bombs. Very soon after, dozens of protesters swarmed a U.S. naval training range on Vieques, forcing a stoppage of live fire training. On January 31st, 2000, with the protests still raging, President Bill Clinton announced that he and then Governor of Puerto Rico, Pedro Rosselló, had agreed to a plan to resolve the dispute over Vieques. The plan called for a referendum of Vieques voters, which was scheduled for November 6, 2001, and then rescheduled for January 2002. Voters would be given the choice of either ending the military's use of Vieques no later than May 2003 or allowing the military to continue its operations indefinitely beyond that date, with an extra $50 million in economic assistance to sweeten the deal. The Clinton-Rosselló plan was quite controversial, and protests continued at the Vieques Naval Base at least until May 4, 2000, when U.S. federal marshals removed the protesters peacefully. The Navy then resumed its bombing practice, but with inert bombs in place of live ammunition. Dissatisfaction with the Clinton-Rosselló plan indisputably contributed to Governor Pedro Rosselló's defeat in his bid for re-election in 2000. The winner of that election was Sila Maria Calderón, the former mayor of San Juan, who, incidentally, is a graduate of Manhattanville College in Westchester County, New York. During the campaign for governor, she pledged to take immediate action to halt all war games on Vieques. In April 2001, Governor Calderón introduced a noise prohibition bill, signed into law that month, which was meant to challenge Navy ship-to-shore shelling off Vieques. On April 24, 2001, Puerto Rico filed a federal lawsuit to end U.S. military operations on Vieques, arguing that such operations threatened public health and violated the island's 2001 Noise Prohibition Act and the 1972 Federal Noise Control Act, but a federal judge dismissed the lawsuit, citing a lack of jurisdiction. All the while, human rights activists, actors, politicians, and ordinary folks continue to protect U.S. military exercises on Vieques. Al Sharpton and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. were among the protesters, and both spent time behind bars for the party they played. Then in June 2001, before the referendum of Vieques voters called for in 2000 could take place, the Bush administration announced in an act of reconciliation that it would halt all military training operations on Vieques by May 2003. In the years since the Navy withdrew, the island has gone from a military training site to a pristine and secluded beach resort, some 15,000 acres of it now under the control of the Department of the Interior's Fish and Wildlife Service, which has turned those acres into the Vieques National Wildlife Refuge, one of the Caribbean's largest natural preserves.
Thank you for listening to Latino Americans with your host and narrator, Jacqueline Torres.